Have you no heart?
No! I have no heart. I feel no love, nor fear, nor joy, nor sorrow. I am hollow, and I will live forever.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nicely.
Did I get the part?
We'll call you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide. My name is Bibbiani. I'm a film critic, and everybody calls me Bibbs.
My name is Witney Seibold. I am also a film critic. Member I messed it up.
You did?
Yeah, member LAOFCS. That's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah, it is, but well done indeed. I am also a member of the LAOFCS, and this week we're reviewing a bunch of movies.
Yep.
Like we do.
That's
kind of our
That's
thing.
our shtick.
Yeah. Because we are critics.
This is kind of a trim week for movies, however, for new releases at the very least.
Yeah, the first week or two of December is often kind of a dead zone because they released a ton of stuff on Thanksgiving weekend and
then
a lot
on Christmas weekend.
Yeah, on Christmas weekend, a lot of studios like trot out all of their last-minute major holiday/Oscar releases. So often you'll find the first week in December is you get like one lousy horror movie or something like that, or one lame comedy. But we are going to be reviewing a new supposedly Oscar contender motion picture, Tonya. I'm going to be speaking at some length about my latest adventures in Hallmark Christmas land.
You're a braver man than I.
And we're going to be doing our latest double feature where on the Schmoville Facebook page, you picked a supposedly bad movie for us to review, and we're going to pair it with a good or classic or even great movie to sort of illustrate the connection, bridge that gap between the good and the bad. And, of course, we'll be reading some of your emails.
The sublime and the ridiculous.
That's right. We don't do a lot of news on this show. Our old podcast, the B-Movies podcast, we did a lot of news. We kept it really up to date. But there is...
We had a shtick that people have been asking that we bring back.
Yeah, the Totoro Hat of Doom, which was a hat in the shape of a Totoro.
And it's retired.
It's retired. We might bring it back for a special occasion, but...
It's moved back to Palm Springs. It's living happily. It's fine.
Yeah, that's where we randomized all of our news coverage. But there is one thing I think a lot of people are talking about right now that I am kind of curious to get your thoughts on.
Okay.
Disney looks like might be buying 20th Century Fox's various, like, it's basically its film catalog.
Yeah.
And maybe it's television as well. I'm not sure how far it goes. There are
From what I understand, Disney already owns, like, ESPN, so it's not going to get Fox Sports.
I think they're not getting any of the news.
And they're not getting any of the news stuff. And
the idea, I believe, is that 20th Century Fox is going to ditch all of its movies, all of its creative endeavors, and put all of its money into news, which has a lot of people concerned because Fox News has a particular political bent. It's already something of a juggernaut. And the idea is that this would only make them more influential. There's also the very real consideration that Disney owning this many intellectual properties is becoming a greater monopoly than ever, and they were already kind of a monopoly to begin with.
They own I think the lion's share of the entertainment dollar right now. I think it, like almost a third of the market goes to Disney now.
I don't have any figures in front of me, but it sounds right.
It sounds about right.
Yeah.
And if they were to buy Fox, it would go up to not half, but very close to half, which is a huge portion of the market.
Well, when you think about some of the various things that they would suddenly own, Disney would own...
Like Aliens, for instance.
A lot of people talk about the X-Men movies. Obviously, they would have that. They would own Die Hard.
Yeah.
They'd have Die Hard. What did Disney Die Hard even look like?
And say, well, just get ready for Disneyland Die Hard Tower Adventure or whatever.
Yeah.
That is a terribly, terribly horrible thing. And I find it really disheartening that so many of the arguments I've been seeing are only staging it in terms of superhero movies. It's like, a lot of people... Disney has the Avengers, now they'll have the X-Men, and so...
That's like the end result of a lot of this.
Seeing a fight scene between Wolverine and Captain America would require the sacrifice of a lot. Because Disney is so powerful, they have already been dictating the terms of films' releases. They've been winnowing their stuff into like a single streaming service, which all this Fox stuff would presumably also go on.
Oh, sure.
And they have been dictating to movie theaters the conditions of the release of their films.
Right.
You can go to an AMC theater and use a free pass unless it is a pre-selected Disney film. They're able to actually get out of the free pass thing and pad their dollar, knowing that the audience is huge for something like Star Wars or the big superhero films. And there's nothing stopping them from limiting theaters' access to these movies unless ticket prices go up.
Right.
Disney would have the ability to essentially price out all other movies.
Well, that's the danger of having a monopoly in the first place.
They've always been hugely aggressive, even when they were in their low point, like in 1985, when they were releasing stuff like The Black Cauldron. They were still trying to sort of scoop up everything.
Right. No, I don't think people appreciate why we had monopoly laws in the first place. It's to prevent someone from controlling so much of the market that the marketplace shoves out a competition and also forces the consumer to basically have less options because the people who produce the content can dictate all of the rules. But I don't know. Here's my thing. I'm not an economist. I don't know the legalities and all the rules of this. I understand that a lot of people are discussing this from the perspective of the end consumer, because the end consumer, if you don't have any stock in that company, there's a decent chance the most this is actually going to affect you is the entertainment you consume.
Yeah.
And now it will be owned by a different company with a different ethos, with different ideas. And the idea of, hey, Disney owns Planet of the Apes now. Well, the Jungle Book makes more sense. Let's do that. Like, that's the future. The Jungle Book is actually the future or something. I don't know. It's weird. Like, you can have the Guardians of the Galaxy fight Predator. That sounds kind of neat, I guess, but we need that? I don't know.
Watching these established characters fight each other is not going to give me, and I don't think it would really be giving general audiences enough of a thrill to justify all of the pricing out that would be going on.
Well, potentially going on.
Yeah. It would kind of assure a certain type of creative stagnation. There's not going to be a lot of daring artists who are putting, making mid-budget, really interesting, really adult movies in such a construct. It would all be poured into these gigantic blockbuster movies.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. One of the best movies 20th Century Fox put out in the last couple of years is Gone Girl, a movie I cannot imagine Disney putting out.
No.
Not in a million years.
No.
Not in a million years.
Disney likes to play it safe. That's always been their MO. What was the last, I suppose all the Miramax stuff, they bought Miramax at some point.
But that was its own sidearm. No, they could do that with
25 years ago.
They could do that with 20th Century Fox, though. Keep it mostly separate, bring over a few things that they like, and then just let them do their own thing. That could happen, much like it had with Miramax.
I don't like the idea of one company dictating all of my entertainment choices.
Right, and I think that should give everyone pause. So if you're excited about the X-Men possibly showing up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or vice versa, you can be excited about that. That might be a fun thing for you. But I encourage you to think about the long-term ramifications of Disney becoming this powerful. I mean, they're already insanely powerful.
They're already way too powerful. Right.
Well, where's the line? Ask yourself this question: where's the line? If it owns
it's miles behind us.
But seriously, what? Okay, so you're cool with it owning 20th Century Fox. Okay, what if they bought Universal? Okay, well that'd be awesome. Now Jurassic Park gets to be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. Okay, now what if they bought Paramount and Lionsgate? What's left?
And James Bond and Star Trek and everything and
what Warner Brothers all of a sudden. Then we're just, it's all owned under one banner and we see them as benevolent, and maybe, hypothetically, maybe they are, but there's no guarantee that they always will be.
Yeah. I hate to bring up his name because it pegs me as a pretentious douchewaffle, but Noam Chomsky once said,
"Oh God,
that when you hand something over to a corporation, it's not like you're handing it over to a nice person. Corporations don't care about you;
they care about the bottom line. That's literally their job. Yeah, that's their job. They have to protect their shareholders. That's the job. It sounds like we're saying that they're evil. That's just their job. They have to care about the money first and foremost.
So. Rooting for the Borg in this situation is not something I want to do.
So anyway, that's where we're at right now. In case a lot of people are wondering, because I think a lot of people are. We've tackled.
That's big news, though.
It's big news. It could change everything. So we're going to keep an eye on it. Hopefully, it all works out for the best. That's kind of my motto in life. Just work out for the best. I beg of you. I can't take anymore.
And for God's sake, stop buying Porg merchandise until you see the movie.
All right, so we're going to get to our double feature a little later in the show, but let's talk about a couple of movies. Let's talk about First and foremost, the biggest, most noteworthy, I think, release, the release people are going to be talking about in the weeks to come. I, Tonya, the latest biographical drama. It stars Margot Robbie from Wolf of Wall Street, Suicide Squad, Focus, which I thought was an underappreciated film.
Very talented actress. She was also in Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Yeah, she's just really, really terrific. And here she is playing Tonya Harding. Now, you and I remember Tonya Harding. I assume you remember Tonya Harding.
Oh, yeah. I'm curious, actually, how people who were like... Because it's 2017. There are going to be a lot of people who are adults, fully functioning adults, able to buy alcohol, who were born after... the incident everyone knows Tonya Harding for, and it's possible that she may be like a stream footnote to a new generation. Tonya Harding was an Olympic figure skater, an incredibly talented Olympic figure skater. She mastered a technique called the triple axel, which is nearly impossible, and almost no one's ever done it. And yet she was also very confrontational, very abrasive, and she was not the image that the ice skating world was really interested in pursuing, but she was so talented they had to deal with her.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but she was white trash.
And the movie tells you that. Like, she actually owns it. Like, I'm white trash.
In her own words, she even says she's white trash. Yeah. And that's not the image that Olympic committees go after. There's this very... aggressive form of femininity. This sort
it's
of
almost
very
a Disney princess kind of mentality.
Classical, almost regal version of femininity that figure skating has always sold to the public. And figure skaters not only have to be talented skaters, but they also have to have a very mannered, very sort of classical, very innocent life, or at least an innocent tone about their body.
Here's the thing: as an Olympian, you're representing your country, and that is they consider what do they tell the world about us if we send them off to wherever the Olympics are this year. So Tonya Harding was a rising star in the figure skating world.
This was in the early 1990s.
Yep, and the Olympics were coming up, and there's a lot of hearsay. There's a lot of people say it happened this way. A lot of people say it happened another way. But essentially, Tonya Harding's husband and his best friend / her bodyguard conspired to attack her competitor.
Kneecap a competitor.
Yeah, attack her competitor, Nancy Kerrigan. It was huge scandal, worldwide news.
I was out of the country when this happened, and it was like I was in Greece and I was hearing about this.
Yeah,
about the Olympics in Lillehammer.
Well, we've heard Olympic scandals before, but it's usually stuff like, oh, they're on steroids or something. Like, this was actually like someone conspired to physically, injure someone and take them out of the game. It's really melodramatic. It's the stuff a Lifetime original movie is based on, like that kind of like melodramatic interpersonal human drama. And the thing with I, Tonya is that it's kind of hard to escape the fact that the actual story we're being told here is TV movie type stuff. It's kind of... I'm not trying to bring her down further than the world already has, but like, her story is not altogether unfamiliar. Not just because it's famous, but because it's the kind of thing that, the Texas cheerleader murdering mom.
There's a lot of
heard these stories.
Really crazy crime stories. Like, if you ever watch Jerry Springer, and they got all these like crazy crime stories by people who fancied themselves criminals but weren't.
Yeah, they think they're shit. They think they'll get away with it, and they have no idea what they're doing.
And they get busted, and they make these sort of headlines like the dumb criminal subgenre.
Yeah.
That was this, but on an Olympic level.
Yeah, so it's fascinating, and I totally get why you make a big movie out of it. What is it? Craig Gillespie directed this one, right? The guy who did Lars and the Real Girl. Because there's also Craig Brewer, and I get them confused sometimes. Craig Gillespie, he directs this movie in a very freewheeling, very energetic, very conversational pace. If you saw the James Brown biopic Get On Up, it plays very much the same way, with scenes playing out and then the protagonist looking to the camera telling you this didn't actually happen. And it's a way to keep you constantly engaged, as if you are not just watching some stodgy biographical film about someone's life, but that they're actually telling you a story about their life, like over a beer, and like backtracking sometimes and getting distracted and defending themselves.
That the characters are all eternally distracted, and that they didn't really think anything through, and that they are only now in the present day, when they're in their late 40s, early 50s, having any sort of actual reflection on what happened back in 1994.
Right.
only now can they kind of put a story together. And they're all coming to the conclusion that they all lived pretty rotten, tragic lives.
Yeah.
Tonya Harding did not have it easy. She had an abusive mother, who in the movie is played by national treasure Allison Janney.
She's amazing.
Who is great and just intimidating and horrible, chain-smoking, like, rabbit coat-wearing harridan. She moves in with her, like, openly abusive, closed-fist punch boyfriend who she has, and eventually husband, who she puts restraining orders against. She's trying to flee this guy, but keeps on going back to him, and that cycle of abuse that happens.
And according to him, and a lot of the story is told like from his perspective through his testimony as well, she was also very violent as well, and there are scenes of her chasing around the house with a shotgun.
Yeah, well, in retaliation.
Well, in retaliation. My point is that my point is that Tonya Harding wasn't just she was fighting against all this. And I think that's the thing that the movie finds very inspiring about her, is people are pushing her down and she's using it as negative reinforcement to push her to be greater. And I think the movie kind of can't help but admire her for being able to turn all this negativity into something even remotely positive. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Well, and also that this life that she had been living is the thing that's actively keeping her from being an Olympic champion.
Yeah.
She has the talent. She trained a lot. She had the drive. Her trainer, played by Julianne Nicholson in the movie, there's this great training montage where she's like lifting paint cans and pushing over logs and stuff. And she says to the camera, and this is what Rocky did in Rocky IV to fight that Russian. And you think, well, she didn't possibly do that. And then Julianne Nicholson turns to the camera and said, Tonya Harding actually did this.
Yeah.
Like, she actually went out into the woods and lifted logs and stuff to get into fighting shape. She was determined. Skating was what she had.
But it's a weird dynamic because, again, she's got an abusive family. This is all she knows. It's absolutely horrible. And yet the story keeps kind of speeding along. It's almost like that Gus Van Sant movie To Die For, where it admires her so much. By the way. Great movie, but like it admires her so much that I feel like the movie's style, which I think is designed to make it more palatable, to make it a little bit less Oscar baity, also is in some respects kind of keeping it down, because I think it is not doing a particularly good job of hiding just how like familiar this sort of celebrity bio tale is, but also I think it kind of undermines a bit just the actual horror of what she had to go through by making it funny.
It's the soundtrack that does it, and I watched this with my wife, and she's very sensitive to certain pop song cues. First of all, they're not 90s songs, they're 70s songs, which is a little bit obnoxious, but yeah, they really try to punctuate all of the tragic elements with ironic, upbeat musical numbers. And they do it many, many, many times. Like, there's 20 different musical cues throughout this film. And it becomes really distracting after a while to have that same note. Here's tragic event in Tonya Harding's life, and it's going to be all of a sudden undercut by,
Norman
John
Greenbaum.
Denver or something.
Yeah.
Or Spirit in the Sky. You can't use Spirit in the Sky anymore.
Michael killed Spirit in the Sky.
And that was 1995.
Yeah, you can't use Spirit in the Sky after Michael. It's dead.
Guardians of the Galaxy brought it back. I guess the statute of limitations was up.
I think it was allowed to make like one quick like sort of cameo appearance.
Like,
hey, remember Spirit in the Sky? We do. Go away.
Yeah.
We're good. You were a good song once. We're done now. We're done now.
My rule is if it's used notably in at least one other film, you don't get to use it in your film. Nobody else can use Stuck in the Middle with You.
I think you can do it. I think you can do it if you do it in a completely different way. Like, for example, Sound of Silence. Is it Sound of Silence that they use at the beginning of The Watchmen?
Yes.
Yeah, like that, they actually use it in a very different way than The Graduate. I'm okay with that. You did a different thing. But when you're literally just using Spirit in the Sky for montage music, we're done.
Yeah.
you got to find another song. I'm sorry. It's not funny anymore. It's not, you're not helping the song at all. It's just like, if I have to watch one more fucking sad montage set to Hallelujah.
Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. I think there's numbers.
Which is also in The Watchmen, and that one didn't work.
I think Hallelujah, there's numbers on that, is like maybe the first or second most covered song of all time. Like, every artist has Hallelujah in their drawer.
Right.
It's a great song, but it's okay. We have it already. We're good.
I think we can talk about, like, you know, like, is the style of I, Tonya getting in the way of the story, or is the story really that interesting? Is the story really worth being blown up that much? You can talk about it all you want, but what you can't deny in this movie, and what reason why, even though I don't think it's amazing, I think it's definitely worth watching, Margot Robbie is holy shit amazing.
Margot Robbie is great. Allison Janney is great. And I think their performances, those two in particular, are managed to lift this film up a considerable degree.
Yeah.
And it's not that she's showy. She actually is Tonya Harding, and she's making a conscious effort to turn this person who was really vilified and pilloried by the media into a human being with a strong, sympathetic story.
Without just apologizing for her and trying to make it sound like she was, you know, completely blameless in the Nancy Kerrigan incident or anything. It actually is reasonably dimensional. Like, it's not just like, oh, but she was great. Huh? Don't you feel like a jerk? A little, actually, but, like, seriously, there's a lot of shadings to this, and I think the movie does do a good job of capturing a lot of different perspectives all at once, and I think that is something that that conversational style helps with. Anyway, I think it's an imperfect biopic, but I also think it's definitely a good one, and it's arguably a great one just because of Margot Robbie and Allison Janney, who are fucking phenomenal.
Well, it also brought back a lot of flashbacks because I was a teenager when all of this went down. I remember when Nancy Kerrigan was kneecapped. I remember when Tonya Harding came in 8th. And I remember when she complained about her shoelaces shredding and she had to start her number over again, and that didn't get her any points. And I remember that Nancy Kerrigan came in 2nd to Oksana Bayul.
Yeah.
I think she was from the Ukraine.
And everyone was just sort of like, wow, she came in 2nd after she got injured in her knee. And at the same time, it's like, but a better ending would have been if she got in the gold.
Or
you know, like that would have been, that's how you end the movie. It's not kind of a dissatisfying ending to the movie. In real life, it's as good as you can get. That's pretty, still silver at the fucking Olympics. It's amazing.
There's a certain new type of biography that's coming out that's really analyzing the empty sensationalism of the media you and I grew up on from, like, the 80s and 90s. There's a really, really terrific documentary about the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling that came out a couple of years ago, for instance. This kind of female-only subset of the WWF that, or I guess now the WWE, which was, all these really cartoonish Saturday morning type lady wrestlers that was part tittillating but part just goofy.
There's a really good Netflix dramatic series about it.
There's the Netflix series about the same phenomenon. Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler is very much that, trying to really pick apart this cartoonishly exaggerated version of masculinity that our generation absorbed through pro wrestling.
Well, we were told that this was success, and then we realized
and
that
that's what
it's not.
Success looked like. But it's
in the long run, it's actually sad.
Even as a kid, it looks super absurd, and now we have to deal with the fact that these absurd cartoon images we grew up with have human faces as well. I think The Wrestler is a great film. I think I, Tonya might make a good double feature with it because it's taking this. Well, maybe not perfect, but it'll be very good because it takes this figure from media, Tonya Harding, who is a scandal. She's like, Lorena Bobbitt. She's a funny news story more than she is a human being. And we take this funny news story about all of these clueless white trash criminals and tries to give Tonya Harding a human face, and I think it succeeds.
Well, fair enough.
And it kind of dissects this goofy, ironic version of media that we grew up with and gives it, the actual heart that it deserves.
Well, I'm actually interested in, I would love to see like a triple feature of I, Tonya, and also a couple of the other movies that kind of sprang out of this, but right at the time. For example, there was a TV movie in 1994 called Tonya and Nancy, The Inside Story, which starred Heather Langenkamp from...
Perfect casting.
Oh my gosh, she looks just like her.
I'm surprised they didn't get Heather Langenkamp to do, like, Nancy today and I, Tonya.
I think she could have gotten away with it. This was a TV movie that came out, like, right afterwards. Heather Langenkamp from Nightmare on Elm Street and Wes Craven's New Nightmare looked eerily like Nancy Kerrigan. And in fact, I interviewed Heather Langenkamp once, and I asked her about this movie, and she was talking about how she found out they were making the movie, and she was just like, she called up the production company, you do not understand how much I look like Nancy Kerrigan. And she went in, and I think they were already making a deal with another actor, and there was like, oh shit. And they brought in Heather Langenkamp instead at the last minute, because she looks so much like her. But also, Tonya Harding was in an action movie.
Tonya Harding.
Tonya Harding
was in an
real
action.
Tonya Harding was
All
in a
right.
low budget action movie in 1996.
Oh,
Let me look it
wow.
up. Called Breakaway.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, also co-starring the great Joe Estevez. And it's about a drug courier who runs afoul of the mob, and I think Tonya Harding's only like third or fourth lead in it. But you can see clips online of Tonya Harding kicking ass, and I don't know. There was this interesting period where a lot of these sort of scandal celebrities, or people who are in the news for sort of bizarre reasons.
Kato Kaelin.
Kato Kaelin's one. Anna Nicole Smith ended up in a few movies. Some of them prominent. She was in Naked Gun 33 and a third.
But she was an actress.
She was an actress, but her celebrity got boosted because she had married a very elderly, rich man, and that was
Minor scandal.
Minor scandal, and then she was really visible, and she used that to make some movies. If you ever get a chance to see her in the Die Hard knockoff Skyscraper, where she plays a helicopter pilot who gets trapped in a skyscraper when a bunch of terrorists attack, and she has to shoot her way out. It's kind of amazing, actually, and it's totally worth seeing. I think it used to be on Amazon, like Amazon Prime. It's certainly worth checking out. It's a phenomenally weird, low-budget, bad action movie. So I like that. I've always been fascinated by that mini subgenre of people who were in the news for a couple of reasons and then made one action movie.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating.
I need to see that Tonya Harding action movie. I know she was on all of those really dumb, sensational celebrities do goofy things shows, like The Surreal Life. She did like a celebrity boxing tournament at some point.
Yes, she did, actually. Anyway, she's a very interesting person, and the movie is rather good. But one thing that the movie doesn't really have in any great abundance is Christmas.
No.
Not so much. It's not really a Christmas movie.
That was a pretty awkward segue.
Thank you.
Move on.
Hallmark Christmas continues apace. I'm not going to spend nearly as much time on it this week as I did last time, but I want to talk about a couple of movies that I did see. I saw Switched for Christmas, starring one of the other queens of Hallmark Christmas, Candace Cameron Bure. But it doesn't just star Candace Cameron Bure. It stars Candace Cameron Bure and Candace Cameron Bure.
Oh, no.
They are identical twins. One of them is a busy businesswoman who loves business.
It's the Parent Trap.
It's
that adult remake of the Parent Trap that they got Haley Mills to do in the mid '80s.
There you go. Candace Cameron Bure plays a busy businesswoman who loves business. She also plays her somewhat estranged family school marm Christmas lover who loves Christmas sister. And what happens is, it turns out that Candace Cameron Bure, business, is in charge of running the office's Christmas party, but she doesn't like doing that. That sounds like a lot of work. Fortunately, Candace Cameron Bure, family,
family.
She has been putting on the local Christmas pageant every single year. It's never different, and she really wants to do something completely different this year.
So they're like same character, different subtitle. They're like Pokemon games.
Yeah. So Candace Cameron Bure, business, goes and switches places with Candace Cameron Bure, family, so that she can just go through the paces, put on the Christmas pageant like they do every year. She barely has to touch it. But then, turns out, the guy she had a crush on when she was in high school, he's in charge of the Christmas pageant now, and he wants to do a whole bunch of different things. So you'd think they would just switch back, and they don't for no reason.
And the guy is some bland Canadian hunk.
I don't know if he's Canadian, but bland. Yeah, very bland. Like, delightfully bland. Very charmingly bland. That's the whole fucking movie. I got nothing for you. It's exactly what it is on the tin, but by God, I saw it, and now you've heard about it. The other one I want to talk about...
You're just bragging at this point.
Oh, I saw it. Oh, yeah, I have Hallmark Channel.
I watched it. I'm not reviewing it for you fuckers.
There's not much to it. It's just that goddamn movie. Like, every single thing that movie is going to do. But the one that I was sort of weirdly fascinated about is this other movie that came out called Christmas in Evergreen, which is about a town called Evergreen, and it's super duper mega Christmassy. And in Evergreen, they have...
Starring Valentina Nevermore. And I don't know, what's a good, like, YA novel name?
Valentina Nevermore.
Lance Ravenwind. I don't know.
Okay. Anyway. In the town of Evergreen, they have... Oh, wait. Sit back. Enjoy this.
All right. Evergreen.
Magic snow globe.
Like there's just one floating around and everyone has it?
No, it's like a snow globe. It's like at the local diner. And if you make a wish on this snow globe and you wish your heart's true wish, that thing will happen.
Okay.
Now, you would think there'd be a bunch of really cool stuff in this town, like people who are ninjas, because they wish to be a ninja, and now they're a ninja. There are people flying around.
They're all wealthy, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I guess everyone wishes to stay in Evergreen, like, forever. So, the story is about the local veterinarian who's just about to leave.
And who's she played by?
She's played by Ashley Williams. You don't know her. You probably don't. And she's gonna leave. She's gonna go be with her Washington D.C. big business boyfriend. But just before she goes, every single time something pulls her right back. She gets to the airport. There's a cancellation, and she keeps running into this hunky doctor played by Teddy Sears from Masters of Sex and The Flash.
Okay.
And his cherubic young daughter who wishes with all her might on this snow globe. She just wants to be Christmassy. But her mom died of car crash canceritis and like a year ago. So like they're fine now. And he doesn't want to have her deal with Christmas because it'll remind her of her mom.
Wait a minute, Ashley Williams, she was the one from The Father of the Bride, right?
No.
Did she play the daughter in Father of the Bride?
No, you're thinking of someone else.
All right.
She's in the Christmas Train this year on Hallmark.
Okay.
So, the reason I bring this up is because I think Christmas in Evergreen may have unlocked a Hallmark Christmas interconnected universe.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh is right, because the guy who plays the protagonist's business boyfriend who lives abroad and who wants to like get married or at least have a meaningful long-term relationship with the protagonist, but his plans are waylaid when she gets trapped at the airport. And the airport, there's a closure, there's a blizzard, and then she falls for this other guy who likes Christmas more than the other dude. That guy is played by...
That's what makes you an eligible mate in the Hallmark universe. How much you love Christmas.
Well, if you love Christmas less than someone else, you are less desirable.
I suppose so.
That's how it works. So the actor who plays the busy business boyfriend is an actor named Marcus Rosner. Marcus Rosner was in another Hallmark Christmas movie, A Christmas Detour, starring Candace Cameron Bure.
Okay.
But not Candace Cameron Bure, just Candace Cameron Bure. And in that movie... Marcus Rosner played the busy business boyfriend who wanted to get married to the plucky female protagonist, and then her flight got delayed, and then she fell in love with some other guy.
So he's the Baxter from this other movie. He's now playing the romantic lead in...
No, he's not the romantic lead. He's the Baxter in both films.
Oh, okay.
He's like perpetually
I thought he was like switching
screwed.
roles.
No, he's perpetually screwed.
He just lives at that airport.
There are so many people that we don't really think about in these movies because they're the ones who get passed over in favor of the better boyfriend or the better girlfriend or whatever. And... you got to realize their lives keep going, but they're still in a Hallmark universe, and they haven't changed. They haven't evolved. They don't love Christmas more now, so they still don't have love, and they are perpetually alone. It's like a Bergman film. Like it's like terrifying.
When you think of Peter Pan and you think of Neverland and how these people are never permitted to grow up or change or experience any kind of maturity, and Captain Hook will always be Captain Hook.
That's tragedy.
That's really sad.
It's supposed to be sad. Yeah. It's momentarily fun when you're a kid, but then Wendy grows the hell up and then moves on because Peter Pan's existence is pathetic. That's the point of the story.
I'm going to wear leaves and fight pirates.
For how long? Ever.
Forever.
And I'm done. I'm going to find someone who likes Christmas.
Are you going to start taking baths and put on pants at any point? No, you're just a filthy leaf boy who fights filthy grog-swilling pirates. This is a filthy world. I hate you, Peter Pan. I want a t-shirt that says I hate you, Peter Pan. I have no problems with Peter Pan.
Everything you just said was not bangarang. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, these Hallmark Christmas movies, they I feel like you stare long enough into anything. You stare long enough into white noise on your TV, you're going to unlock the secrets of the universe because there's like nothing staring.
You stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares.
I think there's nothing staring back at you. It's just you. You're just looking at like a Rorschach test forever. if you watched enough of these Hallmark Christmas movies, and you can't help but discover things about yourself. And one of the things I discovered is that I actually quite like Hallmark Christmas movies, but also that there is a very sad, bitter world underneath the Hallmark Christmas land of everyone who is not a protagonist and who is doomed to misery forever in every movie.
I would love to see Terry Gilliam make a movie about the misery world underneath the Hallmark world.
I would love to see that.
There's a bunch of like grease-encrusted Morlocks living underneath this world, pulling the levers and making sure everything goes well for the glittering cookie baking white people up above.
That's how I felt about the Doozers in Fraggle Rock. Like they're gotta be the Morlocks in the time machine, right? Like that's how it works. The Doozers are just occasionally eating one Fraggle. Because they're just dancing their cares away. The Doozers are doing all the work. They're keeping the society going. The only function Fraggles could possibly serve is something to sustain the Doozers. And I just think that, there's a bunch of spare Fraggles lying around. Every once in a while, just like in the background, chomp.
So the Fraggles are the Eloy, and the Doozers are the Morlocks.
That's how it works.
And they all live underground, so why not?
And that's Hallmark to me. So these Hallmark Christmas movies,
I love the Time Machine.
They're the Hallmark Christmas movies. For Hallmark Christmas movies, they're C's on our C- to C+ scale. If you're looking for a Hallmark Christmas movie, you will find one. But I, Tonya, where do you fall on I, Tonya?
I'm going to give it a C+. I thought it was actually really quite moving, despite its bad music choices and maybe some of its cliched story beats. I don't care. I think the performances were really, really terrific, and I think it did a really great job of shedding a really great light on this pilloried figure.
I think the performances are terrific, and I think it's definitely worth seeing. However, because of the efforts I think they made to throw in style in order to disguise a somewhat lack of substance, I don't think this one's going to stick with me in any meaningful way. I think
not even Margot Robbie. Not even.
I think when you bring up I, Tonya, I'm going to say, oh my God, Margot Robbie and Allison Janney are great in that, and then I will move on. I don't really think I'm going to be... I don't think this is going to be on my list of the best biopics ever, even if I do like a top 50. Like, it's good, though, and I do recommend seeing it. I'm going to give it a C.
Okay.
A solid, rock-solid C. Would have been a C+, I think, if it had done a little bit more with the form. But Margot Robbie is fantastic, and if you're a fan of Margot Robbie, and you probably are, you should see it. So there you go. Now, let's get on to our main event.
This is the one you voted for.
Yeah, this week...
This is the boxing match.
Now, this week, you voted for a somewhat notorious bomb that I think has something of a cult following.
Badly reviewed at the time.
Very badly reviewed at the time.
Not well regarded.
No, it didn't make no money, but it was supposed to launch a franchise and it failed to. This was going to be Hugh Jackman's other big franchise, his Indiana Jones to Star Wars, if you're going in Harrison Ford terms. And it just did not take off. No one cared. It also came hot in the heels of the successful The Mummy movies, which were just printing money, even though after the first one, they all sucked.
Well, and the weird thing is The Mummy came out in 99, and it sort of bridged the gap between what Universal was trying to do with its monster properties in the early 90s, what with Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, trying to turn them into these big...
costume dramas.
Gothic art costume dramas.
Yeah, Bram Stoker's Dracula won Academy Awards. These were like big A-level productions.
Bram Stoker's Dracula is aggressively terrible. It is difficult to watch. It's like...
And I love every minute of that
unbelievably
movie.
Chaotic.
I love every minute of that chaotic... It's just...
Kenneth Branagh did the
movie.
same sort of theatrical bombast with Frankenstein, a movie I actually quite like and nobody else does.
I love Robert De Niro in that movie. I think the rest of the movie doesn't keep up with him.
What I love is that Robert De Niro plays the monster, and all of his scenes, the camera is very still. There's no music. He's very quiet. Yeah, it's very quiet. The monster scenes are all very contemplative, whereas all of the scenes with Dr. Frankenstein, the camera's swirling around and the orchestra's having an orgasm, and he's pulling at bodices and running around crashing into things with his shirt off.
In order to make the monster, he's got to do Cirque du Soleil around his entire laboratory, and
pouring electric eels and amniotic fluid into a big tank, and the amniotic fluid for some reason is like maple syrup. It's all like goopy.
God bless you, Kenneth Branagh. You love yourself so much. I wish I loved myself half as much as Kenneth Branagh loves himself. Find
someone who looks at you the same way Kenneth Branagh looks at himself.
I can appreciate why you like that movie, but like the Mummy was
a few years later, the Mummy came out, and they tried to turn it into essentially an Indiana Jones knockoff. This big sort of adventure story with a mummy in it.
Yeah, directed by Stephen Sommers, who had already done the really quite excellent sea monster movie Deep Rising.
Good. Not really quite excellent.
Okay, I'm going to say this right now.
The very watchable and entertaining.
If you're going to do a sea monster movie about a gang of thieves trying to rob an ocean liner, then discovering that everyone on the ocean liner has already been eaten by sea monsters, co-starring Famke Janssen as a alluring cat burglar and Treat Williams as a working class stiff who gets dragged along for the ride.
And Stephen Sommers' very own Lucky Charm, Mr. Kevin J. O'Connor.
Yeah, okay. If you're going to make that movie, you are not going to make it better than Deep Rising.
I suppose you're right.
That is being graded on a scale, and on that scale, that is a 4-star, 3-star movie.
Fine. Fair.
Okay, that's my point. Anyway, so Stephen Sommers did The Mummy. The first Mummy is a lot of fun. I actually like a lot of The Mummy. It's got a good...
It's sloppy and ugly. The special effects stink, but it's certainly enjoyable.
It's got a lot of personality. Brendan Fraser has never been that charming before or since, I think. Rachel Weisz is a scene stealer. Arnold Vosloo brings like a pretty solid sexiness to the villain. I remember seeing this making of feature, and it was like on TBS or something at the time The Mummy came out. And Stephen Sommers was talking about, we're going to make this one really scary. And I realized that Stephen Sommers doesn't know what scary means, because it's not. Yeah. It's maybe
it's
a little
comedy film is what it is.
I mean, some of the monster scenes are a little like, maybe it's just like, ooh, that's kind of
vaguely spooky,
creepy, maybe a little creepy, but like he's not. I don't think he knows how to make a scary movie. And then when the time came for him to do Van Helsing, I think he gave up on scariness, and I think what he did was he made a Saturday morning cartoon show. He basically made his version of the Drac Pack.
More or less. Well, he
if you don't know what we're talking about, there's an episode of Cancel Too Soon about it. It's one of the worst animated shows I've ever seen.
As has been reiterated endlessly, a studio that owns a certain character or property has to, there's contracts in place. They have to use those characters in a film or in a TV show in some way in order to retain the rights. Right. So a studio can't just buy a character and sit on it out of spite.
Now, that being said, a lot of the Universal monsters are a little different because they actually... the Universal monsters are mostly in public domain because they were written in books over 100 years ago for the most part. But Universal does own their versions of those characters. Like, you can't just do the Boris Karloff looking Frankenstein if you don't work for Universal.
In order to retain those, they decided to put all of their eggs in one basket,
or at least to reaffirm that brand.
Make one film that was a big monster mash that had all of the monsters in it. So it has a Dracula, a Wolfman, and a Frankenstein, and for good measure, Mr. Hyde, who I guess is also the Hunchback in this movie because he lives in Notre Dame.
Although there is also a Hunchback played by Kevin J. O'Connor. Yeah. So you got that. You got Brides of Dracula as well. And did you say the Wolfman?
I said the Wolfman. Yeah, there's sexy shirtless werewolf dude.
Everything is in this movie, and it's all kind of congealed together into basically honestly, if this were at Universal Studios and they had Universal Monsterland, the way that they have Harry Potter Land, or like Disney's going to have Avatar Land, I would love this attraction. It's okay, I'm going to say this right now. At the last episode, I said of all the movies you had to pick, there's going to be like one of these so-called bad movies that I actually genuinely like. I like Van Helsing. It's stupid, but I like it for its stupidity. I love its unbridled enthusiasm for every single aspect of it. There is no part of this movie that feels like someone half-assed it. They were really, really trying.
No, in fact, they ass and a halfed it, and that's kind of the problem. Because the movie is 131 minutes long.
Yeah, it's really overblown.
And the first 30 minutes are really, really great, and then the movie stops for what feels like an hour, so they can have this gigantic fight sequence.
Yeah, it's cool.
With Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale and the 3 flying Dracula brides.
Yeah, it's super cool, and he's got
it's super cool.
He's got
for
this
a few
Gatling
minutes.
gun crossbow.
Yeah, but it goes on and on and on and on, and it kills the movie dead, and it never ever picks up again.
I know, it's great.
There's a cool party scene later on that's like really well designed, where there's like people on unicycles and stuff.
And it's a really cool homage to the Fearless Vampire Killers as well, which has one of the best scenes in any vampire movie.
Well, this is an homage to everything. Every visual element is lifted from some somewhere else.
Right. But I do think they do a good job of making them all feel like they come together. The only thing that's super duper mega clunky is the plot, because in an attempt to get Dracula completely ingrained into the world of Frankenstein and the Wolfman, they decide to tie in all of their like kind of origins together in a way that makes no sense whatsoever. So the basic gist of it is this.
And the intro is really great. The intro is in black and white,
Yep.
and we figure out why Dracula and Dr. Frankenstein know each other.
Exactly. So Dracula has actually been funding Frankenstein's research. He's been helping him build the Frankenstein monster. And by the way, they're having this conversation about bringing the Frankenstein monster to life while the villagers are coming with their pitchforks. Like every image you've ever had of a Universal monster movie is recreated in Van Helsing somehow.
Frankenstein has not made the monster yet, and the monster has not gone on a rampage and murdered a little girl yet, but we still have angry villagers. I guess they're mad simply for the crime of grave robbing.
That's a pretty big crime for the time.
I suppose.
It's a pretty big crime for now, honestly. Like, you've been grave robbing? I disapprove.
Who hasn't gone grave robbing?
Honestly.
Once or twice when they're in high school.
But it turns out that Dracula wanted to use Frankenstein's research to resurrect the dead because
he's dead.
Well, he's not. No, it's not. It's not to resurrect him. The idea is that he has all of these brides, and they can't have children. Every time they have children, their little ghoul baby is born dead. So he needs.
It's a gremlin, is what it is.
Basically, it's a gremlin. It's a flying gremlin from like Gremlins through the new batch.
It comes out of a gremlin egg.
Yeah, it's really gross, and it's actually a really disturbing concept because the whole basic idea is he's going to use Frankenstein's technology to resurrect his dead babies.
His dead gremlin babies.
Which is a really dark concept to put in a movie that's trying to be pretty light. It's trying to like appeal to like little kids. Like it's pretty heavy.
They're just gremlin babies. It's all right.
Well, if you really start thinking about it, it's super gross. I'm just saying.
Something this film never does is start thinking about it.
I think they thought about it too much in some ways and not nearly enough in others. Meanwhile, Van Helsing, played by Hugh Jackman, who has probably never looked better on camera.
He looks fantastic.
The camera loves him in this.
They put him in this really fantastic long wig. He's in great shape.
Well, he looks like Vampire Hunter D.
He dresses in this weird sort of leathery the whole film is like leathery steampunk design.
Like it's Vampire Hunter D.
And he ends up teaming up with another vampire huntress played by Kate Beckinsale, who also hasn't looked much better, and she's gorgeous.
Yeah, no.
And she's in like this Anne Bobby super pirate queen outfit with the bodice and the tight leather pants.
Yeah, and the most conditioned hair you've ever seen in the 1800s.
This gigantic, curly, perfect wig, and she's holding a sword and a gun, and they just stand back to back. You're like, that's a pretty cool image.
Yeah.
I could watch those two fight.
And you will.
Oh, no, not that much. Not that much.
Van Helsing is a monster hunter for the Vatican, but he's hunted so many monsters.
And yes, the Vatican has like a Q lab that gives him weapons and stuff.
Yeah. He's hunted so many monsters, some of whom were people once, that he's actually one of the most wanted men in Europe. He, too, is the monster, if you really think about it. And we meet
That's
him.
not really played with a lot, because this film doesn't really spring for the extras. No. Or a lot of human interaction at all, for that matter. It's all monster plot.
We introduce him in like a sort of a mini adventure at the beginning, where he is tracking down Mr. Hyde, who has been hanging out in Notre Dame Cathedral and basically acting like Quasimodo. There's a kind of a cool fight. Honestly, it's fine.
Swinging
it's
through.
Neat.
No, the problem with this movie, and this movie actually was the first sign of the template of how movies were to become in terms of how over-detailed and overblown the stories were, where any given fight scene was so well choreographed and so well designed
that it never stops.
It never stops, and B, it feels like the climax to the film.
Yeah.
Any one of the fight scenes of any of the huge blockbusters from the last 15 years could easily be the climax to the movie.
It's easy to forget that there was a time when action movies didn't mean wall-to-wall action. You could be an action movie and only have a couple action sequences. Like, watch the Brian De Palma Mission Impossible, the first Mission Impossible. Really great movie. You watch that movie and you realize it's kind of only got like 2 action sequences in it, and only one of them is big. Like the helicopter chase from the beginning of Mission Impossible is pretty minor compared to the opening stunt in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation.
Yeah.
And it all builds up to that awesome helicopter bit. Like, it's really cool. That movie holds up rather well.
The best sequence is the one where they have to stay quiet and still.
There's a lot of variety, and I think Stephen Sommers is one of those filmmakers, and you watch a lot of his big movies like G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, and like you realize that he only thinks in terms of bigness.
Yeah.
He doesn't have like a subtle bone in his body, or if he did, he was given too much money and he forgot he has it now because he doesn't have to use it anymore. And I think that's a shame, because I actually do think think Stephen Sommers has a pretty engaging tone in a lot of his movies. He's very flip.
Did you ever see his Huck Finn?
I
From
think I did
like 93 as well.
I think he did that one
with Elijah Wood.
Yeah. Anyway, I like Stephen Sommers, but I think Stephen Sommers is often his own worst enemy. But there's a lot of things that are so kind of deliriously overblown in Van Helsing. I really love them. I think the production design on the sort of universal backlot city that they created, they really created and just used the backlot again, looks fucking amazing. Like, I think it looks like a Tim Burton sketch come to life. It's really great.
It does look incredibly artificial, but I think that's okay for this film that is all artifice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, people go like crashing through roofs, and there's not much consequences.
No, everyone's made of rubber. It's fine.
Yeah.
So Van Helsing was an orphan who was dropped on the steps of the Vatican. So of course they put him to work fighting monsters. But it also, but it also turns out that he may be immortal because what memories he does have is like fighting in a war in ancient Rome. So they send him off to fight Dracula. And he discovers
Dracula, who has absconded with Frankenstein's monster.
Not yet. I think they haven't found him yet.
No, they have him right away.
Oh, right away they have him? Okay.
They take him away.
You saw this a little bit more recently than I have. I saw it like a month ago, so maybe the details are a bit hazier. We need to talk about Dracula, the performance. We did a little your impression of it at the beginning. This is one of the more flamboyant Draculas I've ever seen in a movie. He's just chewing scenery.
Dracula,
left and right.
Dracula gives actors the right to go as big as they want. I mean, Gary Oldman was never more crazy. Well, I guess he's been plenty crazy in other movies, but he was pretty crazy in Dracula.
Well, this was that brief period when Richard Roxburgh, who plays Dracula, the idea was that maybe he'll be like the next Gary Oldman because he was playing bad guys in a lot of stuff. He was the bad guy in Moulin Rouge. Which a movie some people love, some people hate. But
crap, overblown film.
His performance is super crazy overblown in it, though. And then I've seen him in other things where he was actually rather subdued, and he's a very good actor, but he was obviously encouraged to be this bad guy. And he had one chance to play Dracula, and he took every opportunity to ham it up. And he's really quite magnetic. I really like him. I love his scenes where he's pacing around the room, but gravity doesn't affect him, so he just paces up the walls and doesn't think about it. Or he'll teleport over there and just do it in camera, and it looks really fun. Like all of that stuff is very, very engaging. So Dracula is going to use Frankenstein to do the thing, and it also turns out that Dracula has a pet Wolfman who was Kate Beckinsale's brother.
Yes.
And the reason he has a pet Wolfman is because the Wolfman is the only creature that can kill a Dracula.
Okay.
That's the actual plot, is that the reason he keeps a Wolfman around at all times is because the only way he can die is if a Wolfman kills him.
The screenwriter was 8 when he wrote this screenplay. The only way to kill a Dracula is with a werewolf.
You know, it's with a bigger Dracula.
A double Dracula.
Now listen, when you're doing a vampire movie, you get to make up your own rules. A lot of the rules that we think of as canon
hard
for
and fast,
monsters.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about like, werewolves, a silver bullet kills them, right? They literally made that up in the Lon Chaney Wolfman.
Yeah.
That's completely just made that right the fuck up. Like, that's not some ancient legend that got passed down. Like, nope. Literally made it up less than 100 years ago for a movie, and we all accept it. So I'm okay if you want to jostle it around a bit. There's a few things that I think you can't change too much. Like, I've never been a big fan of the idea that vampires, they can walk around in sunlight and they just don't have powers. I think that's bullshit.
Well, I think that
kind of ruins it.
You go back to Nosferatu.
I know.
The whole idea is that he was so allured by this woman's innocence and wanted to keep her alive and sort of feed off her purity that he was forced to sort of stay the night. Like, she was able to sort of she was so pure, she was able to keep the vampire there as the rising sun came up.
Yeah.
He had stayed overnight.
He was a victim of his own desires.
He was a victim of his own desires, and this sort of notion of being lured, essentially lured by this innocence all through the night is sort of a sign of defeat.
Now, and indeed, the sunlight killing a vampire to that extreme degree, that I think was also invented by Nosferatu.
It wasn't the sunlight, it was the dawn. It wasn't the beam. Like, they did it dramatically because, the beams of light hitting him is a good cinematic image. But it's not like the UV rays burn vampires. That was something that people looked at that image and thought, oh, well, it must be the UV rays. Then they took it a little bit too literally. Yeah. It's like, it's the holiness of the thing that's killing the monster. It's like people, when they start putting holy water in squirt guns. Like, really?
we're kind of missing the point.
It's that it's holy, not that it's like acid on vampires.
Yeah, it's because it's not the cross isn't. It's not just a couple of sticks and a plus sign that keep the vampire at bay. It's the symbol of your faith. You believe in goodness, and your belief in goodness and the all-powerful godliness that comes along with that keeps evil at bay.
Right.
Still makes nebulous sense, but like there's at least some. That was the original concept. One thing I really, really do like, though, and I think if you're going to do a werewolf movie, one of the things you have to get right is the transformation. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's the old school sort of cross dissolve as the hair grows on your face effect. That always looks really, really cool. There's the incredible American Werewolf in London / The Howling physical, painful transformation scene with practical effects. That looks fucking awesome.
And The Howling 4... the vampire or the werewolf, like the full moon would come out and this human would look up at the sun and they would like melt. Like they would turn into liquid, like goop would drip down their faces and they'd scream, ah, and they'd melt into a puddle. And then the puddle would like re-solidify as a wolf man.
There's a really cool thing they do in Van Helsing. I actually like the idea. I think the CGI it dated the day it came out. But I think the fundamental premise is kind of creepy and cool. The idea is that you're transforming into a werewolf underneath your skin, and then you have to rip off your skin in order to like be free as a werewolf. And then the same thing is true again as you like
to rip off your werewolf skin and you're a human underneath.
I like that it's a painful, like visceral, gross thing you have to do. I think it's a cool look.
The scene where the werewolf turns back into a guy is like super pandering beefcake shot.
Oh,
like,
everything is pandering in this movie.
Well, I suppose so, but yeah, they got this guy that's like really hunky guy, and they sprayed him down, and he's all wet and buff, and he's like ripping his wolf skin off. It's like it's like romance novel stuff.
It's great, honestly. I think that's all part of the appeal here. I think there's a very retro kind of aesthetic, not just for horror but for adventure, that is all over Van Helsing, and I think it works best on its surface as a surface level, cheesy, rather dumb piece of entertainment. I think it's fun. I think if you take these monsters seriously, which I think is something that Universal has been kind of waffling on, like how seriously do we want to take it? We kind of took it seriously with Benicio del Toro Wolfman.
But that one also kind of bombed.
Maybe too seriously. We'll try to make it a bit more action-y with Dracula Untold. Okay, that didn't work either. Okay, we'll make it more blockbuster-y with the Tom Cruise Mummy. No? Okay, we're going to cancel all of our monster plans until we have figured this thing out. And it's so weird because the thing that's well, the thing with the monsters is that they're really simple, I think.
They're butting heads up against the original versions from the 30s that are still really, really well known. 30s and 40s.
Iconic, yeah.
And there's not a lot you can do with the story of these characters that would surpass those.
Well, because a lot of them were based off of the original stories. I mean, well, Dracula anyway. But
I mean, and Dracula has been revisited so many times. What do you do with that character now that hasn't already been done?
I think you have a lot of freedom to play with it. You just have to remember, and I think this is the thing, that even the original monster movies, the ones that were trying to be super scary, and for the time really, really were, and if you're watching them on like a dark night and you get yourself in the mood, they can still be very creepy.
I think Dracula is still really scary. It feels like a nightmare.
I think Dracula is a little stodgy, but I love the Mummy, and I love the Wolfman, and I love the first couple of Frankensteins. I think those are all very... I love the Claude Rains Phantom of the Opera. I think these are all great movies. But I think the thing that those movies were doing, sometimes intentionally, sometimes in spite of themselves, was they were creating these horrifying creatures that were keeping people up at night and making them very sympathetic because they were outsiders, because they were victims of their own desires. They were tragic figures. They had doomed themselves.
They were the main characters. We didn't care about the humans.
Mostly, and they wanted, and the thing is, for the most part, what they wanted was love. You watch like a lot of action movies or horror movies now, and what people want is
revenge. It's always revenge.
Revenge, conquering the world, opening a portal to hell.
Power. What they want is power.
Power is quite common. They want to be loved. This is one of the reasons why I think Guillermo del Toro is one of the better horror movie filmmakers we have today, is because he understands that, and he really loves his monsters in return. And I think when you look at something like The Mummy, you see that...
The Tom Cruise one.
The Tom Cruise one, that Mummy isn't about anything. That Mummy is about revenge and power. You look at Stephen Sommers' Mummy,
That Mummy is about love. That mummy really just is
just like the original Karl Freund film.
Crosses oceans of time to find the woman he loves again. There's something kind of noble about his evil, and you can nothing matters but how much I care about somebody, and that kind of works. There's a little bit of that in Van Helsing, just a teensy bit, because Dracula is trying to give birth to his children, and I actually really like the Frankenstein monster in this because they got an opera singer to play him, so he's this big, broad, theatrical, very emotional performance, and he just wants to be left alone, and you really feel bad for him.
They give him really weird makeup. He's got this big blue face, and you can see his brain, and there's lightning bolts coming out of his brain at all times. It's a cool
look, actually. But I think this one was rather superficial, and I think that doesn't make people. The reason why Dracula, Frankenstein, to a lesser extent, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the reason why I think they linger over the decades to nearly a century now, at least the Universal monster versions, is because people do have an emotional connection to them, and if you ignore that emotional connection, it's not going to work. But I think the irony about people complaining about something like Van Helsing or even The Mummy is that there's a sense that, those things are sacrosanct. And I think the thing you have to remember is that Universal fucked with them right away.
Oh, yeah.
There was one good sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, genuinely classic, great movie.
I like Dracula's Daughter.
Fair enough. But then they all had a whole bunch of really forgettable sequels.
Yeah.
Watch all the Mummy movies sometime. Or I dare you.
Or don't. Don't ever mainline them over the course of a day like I did.
Well, we did.
Yeah. You watched them with me, so thank you.
That was not fun. A lot of them were really bad movies.
But I don't think
these were schlocky entertainments for the most part. The first ones happened to be really, really great, but for the most part, these were blockbusters.
My complaint is that not that they're treating the characters roughly. I've heard the Monster Mash. The spell is off. Can't really. It's going to take a lot of work to make Dracula scary again after the Monster Mash. Whatever happened to my Transylvania twist? That guy? You want to make him scary?
That was a Dracula. That wasn't the Dracula.
Hotel Transylvania was about the right tone you wanted to take.
You have to understand that Dracula is a lot like Santa Claus. Most of the Draculas you see aren't the Dracula. They're just Dracula's helpers.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So the one you meet in the mall is
that's some guy, but
relay.
He reports to the real Dracula.
What I like to think is that Santa can bilocate, and he is in many places at once.
Well, there you go.
But my complaint about Van Helsing is not that they are violating something sacrosanct. My problem is that
I think some of the complaints were that it wasn't taken seriously.
The filmmaking is so breathless, and the plotting is so sloppy, and the film's so over-detailed and overblown that it becomes really difficult to watch after about 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes are great, and if it had ended, maybe another 50 minutes later, would have been okay.
I think there is...
But it goes on and on and on for another 2 hours, and there's so much plotting, and then there's another climax, and they actually do resurrect those little gremlin babies. That happens halfway through the movie.
That's insane. And then it happens again.
And then, but it's like, you did it. That's the climax of your movie. We're 60 minutes in, and you're already giving me the climax. Fine. And then there's one last confrontation. You have a really long credit sequence to get it out to feature length, and I'm fine on Van Helsing. I don't need 3 Van Helsings at once. It's far too much.
I think there is
Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale are great to look at, but give me small doses.
Well, I think honestly, a film like Van Helsing is made for a certain audience, and I think that audience, for the most part, is younger. I think there's a breathlessness to this that is very appealing when life is breathless and everything is full of possibility and stimulus, and you can process it all, and you don't have to all of this weight of wisdom and experience and maybe arguably really good taste interfering with something like Van Helsing, which I think is made very innocently, very energetically, very exuberantly. I can feel the love that Stephen Sommers has for this material. He really is enjoying putting this on camera, and I can appreciate that. But you're right. It is breathless to the point of being completely exhausting. I saw this when I was probably, my early 20s.
Came out in 2004.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s, and it was good. I enjoyed it. I had a fun time. I can see why it wasn't a huge hit, but I enjoyed it. I'm glad we got this movie. I think if I had seen it for the first time now, I think I would have appreciated elements of it, but I don't think I would have enjoyed it just because it's a little tedious after a while. You can really push too far. It's one of the, you look at a movie even a really good action movie like The Raid Redemption.
All right.
It's a nonstop, once it gets going, it's nonstop action, and it's really, 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 really cool. But I think as you get older, you start
You appreciate the quiet moments a little bit more.
I think that quiet moments really amplify it, and I think that it might play better when you're younger than it does when you're older. No, that's not bad. That's not necessarily a huge critique, but I think that might be why a lot of critics weren't in the mood for it, because you think you needed to be like 16 to really be on Van Helsing's wavelength when it came out.
Well, it was also tapping into new types of storytelling tropes that were just invading cinema at the time, thanks to Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. These big, effects-driven, very, very, very plot-heavy, series that were planned from the start. And I think a lot of other filmmakers looked at those films and thought, well, audiences are really responding to really complex mythologies and the beginnings of bigger stories that will reach across a lot of films. So we need to have a lot more happenstance in our blockbusters. And I feel like, it started in kind of the late 90s, but it really came to a head in the early 2000s of this type of blockbuster filmmaking where the screenplays were just unfettered, digital effects became unfettered, and movies started to become really, really tedious.
Well, listen, let's transition to the classic movie we're going to be talking about today. We had a good long debate, I think, about what we wanted to do for this. I pitched The Witchfinder General as sort of the dark, real history of how monster hunting worked, and why maybe something like Van Helsing is in arguably poor taste. But I think that's interesting. You should watch that movie sometime. But you pushed for, and we went for it, and I totally get it. The 1944 Frankenstein / Wolfman / Dracula sequel, House of Frankenstein, which was not the first crossover between Universal monsters, but it was the first huge monster mash movie.
We had Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. That was the first time those two characters met.
Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, the official title.
Yeah. But 1944 was the first big monster mash that had Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein, and
a mad scientist who isn't Frankenstein.
A mad scientist who's kind of like Frankenstein.
And a hunchback who isn't Igor.
Right. Who's named David in the movie.
Daniel.
Or Daniel. Daniel in the movie. Technically, it's a Wolfman sequel because we have Lon Chaney Jr. playing the Wolfman again, playing Lyle Talbot, the same character.
And indeed, the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman ends in like this big flood, and when they find the Wolfman and the Frankenstein monster again, they've been like frozen underground.
Yeah.
So it is a direct continuation.
So what this series highlights is actually not Dracula, who, according to conventional wisdom, is the king.
King of the monsters.
Is captain. Frankenstein's monster is first in command, and the Wolfman is always second in command. That's the way that works.
He's the secretary.
Well, he's not quite the secretary. That's like the Invisible Man or something. He's way down the totem pole.
Okay.
And the Gillman is always on the bottom. Gillman and Phantom are always down there at the bottom. Nobody cares about them.
Oh, I like them.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde often aren't even included.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, because of that hierarchy, I think it's interesting that they sort of invert it and make the Wolfman the main character of this series.
Well, I think
because
Wolfman
Lyle Talbot's tragedy
Larry Talbot.
Pardon?
Larry Talbot. He's Larry.
Oh, Larry. Okay.
Yeah. They say his name over and over again.
Larry Talbot is... His tragedy is compounded the longer the series goes on.
Yeah.
Because his tragedy is that he's a Wolfman. He hates being a Wolfman.
Yeah.
He can't kill himself because he's a Wolfman.
It's not his nature to be a Wolfman.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like, it's Dracula.
He's really a
Dracula
gentle
is
guy.
Dracula because he was Dracula. Frankenstein monster was born the Frankenstein monster.
This guy had this curse put upon him later in his life.
And he hates himself for it. And it's very sympathetic. And it is...
he's getting older, but he's still murdering. And each time he turns into a Wolfman, it's really, really painful. And the longer it goes on, the more wretched his life becomes. So his only quest is to die. He's looking for somebody who can kill a Wolfman. And evidently that's really hard to find. And I find that to be a really clever inversion of what Van Helsing is trying to do. Van Helsing is a superhero movie. It's about a monster killer. It's about that unflappable cool guy with all of the Gatlin crossbows and buzzsaw wrists and all the other kind of weird James Bond stuff. And it's about action. This was made in 1944 before action was really kind of codified as a genre.
I mean, you had your Tarzan movies and stuff, but the way we think about an action movie now, for the most part, we didn't have that. They were dramas with some action in it.
Yeah. And you can go as far as, I think Star Wars was what really broke that open, that late in sort of the cinema game.
No,
even stuff like Bullet from a few years earlier was more like cop movies with a few action scenes.
I think that's wrong. I think there's certain westerns that are very actiony. You can go, even something like Stagecoach is very actiony. I think also you got
war movies too, like The Great Escape and stuff like that.
Siege movies, a lot of those. But you really got to look at kung fu cinema and samurai
I guess
cinema,
you're right.
And those were
I was thinking
really
of
breaking that
American
open.
cinema, but yeah, you're right. Kung fu was knocking that open far earlier. But yeah, in 1944, we didn't have none of that. And so we had to find a way to tell a story about these monsters with the eye of still keeping them monstrous, which is something we just don't do anymore.
Yeah, this is a movie which every single one of, to a lesser extent Frankenstein, it really isn't in it this much. The Frankenstein monster, I mean. I use them interchangeably. Deal with it. He took his dad's name. We're letting it go. That was the whole point of I, Frankenstein.
His name is Adam Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's it. Done. We're good? We're good? We're just going to be good now.
Do you like when cartoons call him Frankie, or does that annoy you?
I'm fine with that. I don't care.
It alternately annoys me.
His buddies can call him Frank.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. If you do not know the Frankenstein monster really, really well, calling him Frank is rude, and he will knock your block off. And I don't blame him for that.
Do you call him Mr. Frankenstein or Mr. Monster?
Mr. Frankenstein.
Okay.
Monster is a title, like Esquire.
Frankenstein, monster.
Yeah.
That's the next in the dark universe.
But no, all of them, the Frankenstein monster isn't really in this one that much, but all the other monsters are allowed to be actually really monstrous. You think of the House of Frankenstein as, this sort of monster mashup, they're going to fight each other, and there's a little bit of that, but for the most part, this is actually all of their tragedies. You got Dracula shows up, and he's kind of got his own bit at the beginning. Like, he never interacts with the other monsters. But
Dracula, who's played by John Carradine.
Who's quite good as
really
Dracula. I like him.
Yeah,
he's very alluring as Dracula. He's very sexy as Dracula. I think that's something you need as in Dracula. You need a sexy Dracula.
Sexy Dracula.
This is peak John Carradine.
The sexy John Carradine.
There was a time. John Carradine is a pretty good Dracula, and he gets a bit where he meets this family, and he's been ordered by this mad scientist played by Boris Karloff, who doesn't play the monster, he plays the mad scientist, not Frankenstein, another guy. It's unnecessarily confusing, but he's really enjoying the role.
He was a get. It's fine.
It's cool. John Carradine is enlisted to exact this mad scientist's revenge on people who have wronged him. And he insinuates himself into this family. He meets this newlywed couple, and then as soon as the guy leaves the room to get some wine, he immediately is seducing his wife.
Yeah.
And you really just see him rip apart this family over the course of an evening. And it's actually really messed up. It's really dark, actually.
Well, that's what I like. Again, we're focusing on this guy. He's our main character. The breeding couple are never interesting in these movies.
The breeding couple?
The breeding couple. The white, boring milquetoast couple that's going to marry at the end.
Well, they disappear halfway through the movie. Once the Dracula segment is over, they're gone.
So
I
what
thought
we
the
have
movie
is
was over. I was confused.
A story of monsters tearing through life and decency.
Yeah. So then the plot is Boris Karloff plays this mad scientist. He's obsessed with continuing the work of Dr. Frankenstein. At the beginning of the movie, he's imprisoned along with a fellow inmate who is a hunchback who really likes to strangle people named Daniel. There's a big storm. There's a collapse in the building, and they escape. They happen to chance across, like right outside the prison,
George Zucco.
Yeah, a wandering show person who has like this carnival of horrors that he presents in traveling shows. And one of the things he just happens to have on him is Dracula's skeleton. Yeah. Dracula's skeleton still in its coffin. It has a stake through its heart, and supposedly, based on shit I think they just made up for this movie, you remove the stake from his heart, Dracula comes back to life. And indeed, that's what happens.
And I've seen that in other things as well, but it may have started in this film, for as far as I know.
If memory serves, and I was really into monsters a lot as a kid. If memory serves, the earliest thing I can remember for the stake to the heart thing was actually you staked them so they couldn't get up while you cut their head off. Okay. That was the idea. The stake actually itself didn't kill you.
Stake them down. Okay.
Yeah, the stake was just like a pragmatic execution technique for something that can't die. So they just keep struggling. So now they can. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've heard. They kill the wandering showman. They take over his show. There's the whole Dracula bit. There's this weird bit where Dracula gets in this huge stagecoach chase, and I'm like, we've seen you turn into a bat. Stop running away in a stagecoach and just fly.
Fly away as a bat. Well, to his credit, he turns into a crappy rubber bat.
Yeah.
And he can't fly very quickly as a crappy rubber bat on a push pole.
He could hide in a tree or something. They'd never know. So he's defeated.
It's also
relatively easily.
it's really badly edited too, because you're not really sure like where the stagecoaches are in relation to each other, just that they're chasing each other. But yeah, he's knocked off the stagecoach. He's trapped next to it as the sun is coming up, and he turns into a skeleton, and that's it for Dracula.
That's it. He's gone. He doesn't get to interact with any of the other monsters except for Boris Karloff's mad scientist, which is a bit of a downer, actually.
Well, I kind of appreciate that Dracula was the red herring here. You'd think that he was going to be the one to sort of take things over, but no, the mad scientist is the main character.
And indeed, Boris Karloff's character is kind of interesting because he just uses everybody, uses every single monster he finds. He uses the mad hunchback. When he goes to Frankenstein's castle and he finds the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman frozen, as soon as he dethaws them, Larry Talbot is just like, why didn't you leave me there? I was at peace. And then he says, but I think I can cure you using Frankenstein science, so become my new creature servant. And let's make this thing happen. And then Larry Talbot is trapped once again.
Well, he says, let's hurry it up here because, I'm still Wolfman and I don't want to be Wolfman and kill people
full moon's coming. I'd rather not kill someone this month. And
so the mad scientist is like, well, I got to take my time on this experiment. And Larry's like, no, just... Can you just do something, please?
So the mad scientist is focusing all his time on reviving the Frankenstein monster. And there's this weird thing where he's talking about how he's going to take these people who he wants to exact revenge on, the people who threw him in jail in the first place, and he's going to give them a brain transplant. So that now you will be... I don't think they know how brain transplants work. I think they don't realize that when you take someone's brain out, their brain isn't still in them. Well, their personality, he would just be the Frankenstein monster. The Frankenstein monster isn't the Frankenstein monster anymore. It's that guy.
And this is a conceit from, I think it was Son of Frankenstein, the one with Bela Lugosi.
Bela Lugosi as Igor.
Who plays Igor and who wants to put his brain into a Frankenstein monster so he can be bigger and stronger and live longer.
Yeah.
But he just looked like a Frankenstein
monster. It's a body
monster.
swapping idea. Yeah. That's what Daniel the Hunchback wants. He wants to be put into the brain of... he wants his brain put into the body of Larry Talbot.
So this notion that you can kind of move brains around has been part of this series for a little while.
But I think it's sort of like at the end of Soap Dish, where it's like, oh, I know how we save Elizabeth Shue. We'll give her a brain transplant. You're still throwing away the bad brain. She's not going to be Elizabeth Shue in there. You're just putting Sally Field's brain in Elizabeth Shue's body. That doesn't solve anything.
Well, her body would be alive with or without Sally Field's memories in that brain.
Right. My point is that Elizabeth Shue's memories are definitely gone, so she's still dying. All you're really doing is giving Sally Field a younger body, and it's weird. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think movies understand how brain transplants would theoretically work. But I digress. Anyway, they try to revive the monster. Larry Talbot falls in love with a gypsy who Daniel, the Hunchback, is also in love with. She refuses to kill him, and he ends up killing her.
Yeah.
And it's really dark. And
he's a murderer. These are monsters. They're allowed to be kind of monstrous, and I like that.
They're a couple of movies from now, because there's House of Dracula after this. Then there's Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman, and from that point on, the monsters are muted a bit. The monsters are friendlier from that point on, I think. Well, but this is one of the last gasps where this is a very monstrous movie.
By the time we got to the 40s, most of these series were petering out. The Mummy sequels were just sucking harder and harder.
So bad.
The
series got so bad so fast.
We started all this in the early 30s, and we got a good decade out of it, and then they just started
rock
to
solid decade.
Yeah.
1 decade, rock solid. The 40s, a couple of highlights. 50s, 1 or 2 more. First Creature from the Black Lagoon
from the Black Lagoon, but it's almost like an afterthought if you think about it in terms of its timeline. And then by the time... And we've talked about this before, but how the Universal monsters started appearing on television, little kids started seeing them sort of grouped together, and fan magazines started to be launched, like in the late 50s. Forrest J. Ackerman started putting monsters all in the same camp. You could kind of now because we had the precedent of House of Frankenstein, we had this notion in our minds that all of these monsters live in the same universe.
Yeah,
they all kind of hang.
They share an apartment together.
Yeah, even if we're not seeing them, they're still sort of hanging out. There's stuff going on that we're just not privy to.
There's a canon now.
There's a canon, and by the time we got to the Monster Mash, which I think was 1963 or 4, everything had come together, everything had gelled. These guys are just friendly now, and the monsters have no fear whatsoever anymore.
Yeah, if you've ever had Count Chocula cereal, you're part of the problem.
In a weird way, fandom killed off the scariness of these monsters.
A little bit, yeah. Well, familiarity breeds, maybe not contempt, but I think almost familiarity. I think it makes you...
too familiarity.
Makes them friendly. But what I do think is interesting when you watch...
watch what happened to Darth Vader, for goodness sake. Like, little kids, I want to be Darth Vader. Why? He murdered billions of people.
Seriously, he killed billions of people, slaughtered children by hand on more than one occasion. All right? He's one of the most monstrous characters, and I've heard people like, he saved Luke's life at the end. He saved his own son. That's still self-interest. That's not
he didn't
like a
sacrifice himself to like save another planet.
Yeah, he didn't sacrifice himself to like stop the Death Star from being used again. He sacrificed himself because his progeny might die, and that is ingrained inside you. That's in its way is kind of like a self-defense mechanism. That's not that he's not redeemed to me. He's he's a horrible person.
You saw Rogue One, right?
Sure.
There's a scene near the end of Rogue One where Darth Vader like storms on board the good guy's ship and he just murders a bunch of people.
Yeah.
People were cheering for that scene.
It's amazing. Like, it's well shot.
It's well choreographed,
cool,
I suppose, but our heroes are all dying by the score.
I think
and people have more affection for Darth Vader because he's been so familiar to us for so long.
I like that scene because I feel like there's this period. I mean, we had like the cartoons and the books or whatever, but like in the live action movies, there's this whole period where Darth Vader was Darth Vader unchallenged, and he was just this unstoppable force. And we really didn't get to see a lot of that. And there's this moment where Darth Vader is just in a room full of guys, and they can do nothing. They're just in his way, so he kills them all. And you get this sense, after all of these prequels, after all of this, merchandise that made him friendlier, just how threatening he was. And I think that's why I think that scene gets cheers. It's because that's the villain is back.
Okay.
Darth Vader, the bad guy, is properly bad again. And I think that works. I think it works dramatically for that pump shot over the course of the whole franchise. It's like, oh yeah, remember when we were scared of Darth Vader? You might not.
I would like to see him do something like just deliberately cruel, though, like grabbing a guy and just like stabbing his eyes out and letting him go. Yeah, do that.
That's a bit much, but all right.
Come on, he murdered a planet. Well, that's small potatoes in comparison.
I'm just saying, you're not actually seeing this. Whatever. But House of Frankenstein. The other thing I think I do want to bring up about House of Frankenstein is that we think of these old school Universal monster movies as being very classy. And again, I think the initial ones were. Dracula is very classy. The Mummy's very classy. The first two Frankensteins are very classy. After that,
Bride's a little campy. But yeah.
Campy, but it's well produced. It's very distinctively, intelligently produced. It's doing everything it's doing for a reason. House of Frankenstein feels as sloppily put together as Van Helsing. Everything is shoved in there. There's no structure. It's just fan service. That's all this is. This is one of the first fan service movies.
And it's why I wanted to pair it with Van Helsing. Yeah. Because they do have a very similar vibe, but I think it works better with House of Frankenstein just because they're still, at the very least, grandfathering in a lot of the goodwill from the original series.
That's fair.
They're writing on coattails, to be sure, but I think some of the classiness is at least sort of remaining. And we got to see sort of the tail end of the series. There was, like you said, there were only a few others that followed this. It's interesting to watch sort of, you think of Dracula, then you think of House of Dracula, which is only 15 years later. Then you fast forward 60 years and you have Van Helsing. And you can see a definite line of de-evolution going on.
Fair enough. Anyway, I like them both. Honestly, I think they're both kind of. I think they're the same movie 75 years apart or whatever the hell it is.
I would rather have 70 minutes of this than 130 minutes.
Okay, but that's just time. I'm talking about tone. I think when you look at just like, here's what's popular now, here's what was popular then, but we're doing basically the same gimmick, big monster mash. And it's going to be, it's really hard to get all these characters together because they don't really belong together, a lot of them. Like, a couple of them are easier than others to get into the same room. Like, Van Helsing works with any monster. Okay, fine. But why is Dracula hanging out with the Wolfman? What do they have in common? I don't know, but, like...
They're owned by the same studio. That's all we got.
They're messy, but it works. And they're a lot of fun. And I think this is a really great double feature, actually. I think you should totally watch them back to back. And if you've never seen the other Frankenstein or Wolfman or Dracula movies, you should. But I think House of Frankenstein, I think it works on its own pretty well. You might not know why Frankenstein is frozen. Oh, you will if you've heard our podcast. But, like, beyond that, mad scientist runs into a bunch of monsters. The tone is fun. It's kind of creepily shot sometimes. Boris Karloff is great He's so great in everything.
And if you need a chaser, just track down any of the monster films with El Santo and Blue Demon, those old luchador films from Mexico, because those things are freaking spectacular.
I've seen the first one I saw was Santo y Blue Demon versus Dracula, and it was glorious. Glorious movie.
Santa y Blue Demon contra los monstruos versus the monsters. That's the one where it's all of them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nicely done. All right, so that is the main show. We will be back next week with reviews of new movies. We're actually going to do a lot of new movie reviews next week.
Yeah,
like a lot. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do all of the Christmas releases all at once. And that's going to be films like Star Wars, Downsizing, Hostiles, The Post, The Greatest Showman, Molly's Game, Phantom Thread. If they're not out yet, we'll be as spoiler-free as we can. But we really want to get those out of the way because our last two episodes, in addition to our main events, our polls, we're going to talk about our picks for the best movies of the year and the worst movies of the year at some length. And we really want to give those movies a wide berth. But the poll for next week, the bad movie, or allegedly bad movie, you get to force us to watch, that we'll have to come up with a double feature for, will be available at Schmoville by the time this episode goes live, and you'll be able to vote for the following films. Pick the bad film you want us to review the most. Body of Evidence, starring Madonna as a woman who is accused of having sex with her husband to death.
She sexed a guy to death.
Co-starring Willem Dafoe, who's considered an Oscar frontrunner this year, so that'll be fun. Dreamcatcher, probably the first or second most absurd Stephen King adaptation.
And there are some pretty absurd ones.
It's right up there with Maximum Overdrive. It's just one of the stupidest things, but it's got an amazing cast. It's got Morgan Freeman.
It's got every possible idea.
It's fucking great. Great/bad. Judge Dredd is our holdover from last week. It was our number 2. That's the Sylvester Stallone version, not the super cool Carl Urban version.
Nope, this is Stallone, 95.
We're going to go back a bit and give you an option to make us talk about Krull, which was one of the post-Star Wars fantasy sci-fi knockoff movies. Everyone thought it was going to be a big deal. There was a huge merchandising tie-in. They even gave away a Krull-themed wedding.
We're trying to find those people.
We need to find whoever had a Krull-themed wedding.
Krull wedding.
We need to see those pictures. But it's a huge, epic production, and no one gave a crap except me. I watched that movie a lot when I was a kid, so it should be fun to revisit it, unless it's as terrible as people say. And then lastly...
I've revisited it recently when I was an adult.
No,
it's not good. It's not. It's just not.
I was working
at pretty nifty special effects, but no.
I was working at a video store. This is a very typical video store moment that I'm mad people don't get to have anymore.
Krull, that was it. There's
no. I was gonna move on to the last one in a second, but someone came in and people just come in and they would just remember a scene from a movie and they had no idea what it was. And this is before the internet was full of that information. I was like, hey, do you have that movie with a giant spider and an hourglass? And we all just went Krull.
You want Krull?
You want Krull?
Oh, you don't want Krull, but here's Krull. Yeah.
And then your last choice for the poll is Spice World, the Spice Girls movie starring the Spice Girls as the Spice Girls in a world.
And Meatloaf is their bus driver.
I think Elton John is in it briefly. It's a cult classic. Whether or not it's good, we will have to discuss.
Cult classic it's a pretty universal term and can often translate to piece of crap.
But people enjoy watching it. So again, real fast, your options: Body of Evidence, Dreamcatcher, Judge Dredd, Krull, Spice World. Go over to the Schmoville Facebook page, vote for your favorite. We will review the film you pick en masse next week. Now, let's review some emails. We got a lot of emails this week.
Emails. We did.
We only have so much time because you actually have to go do something, so we're going to get through as many as we can.
Yeah.
But our email address is criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. Send us questions, reactions. We review. We do as many as we can. So let's get going.
This one comes from Hayden. Hello,
Hi, Hayden.
Hello. In October, me and my family went to see one of the year's most critically acclaimed films, The Florida Project. I walked in very excited because it's A24, and many people I respect were calling it one of the best films. Even some said the best of the year. When I walked out of the auditorium, I said to myself, that might be the most overrated film of 2017. The only film beating The Florida Project at the moment is Personal Shopper, but that's beside the point. I love films that try to be realistic and not flashy. A good recent example is the marvelous American Honey. I loved American Honey. That was a good one.
Yeah. didn't see that one.
The Florida Project is a very realistic film, for the most part, but its commitment to realism hurts the storytelling. There are many times that I found the film to be very repetitive and frankly boring. This is a trap that some films fall into when trying to be realistic. The filmmakers don't know what to show and what not to show. All that being said, the performances and select scenes were so great that at the very least I cared about where the film was going. For the majority, I was feeling a 6.5 out of 10, maybe a 7 if the ending was really good. What really ruined the film for me was the final 30 seconds. Those final 30 seconds I found to be so dishonest and unrealistic that I was tempted to give a middle finger to the screen, but I couldn't because my mom was sitting right next to me. For a film that prides itself on being super realistic, for Sean Baker to pull a fake happy ending made me mad. I have 2 questions for you guys. If you've seen The Florida Project, do you agree with me or am I just crazy, and what are some recent films ruined by an ending? For the second question first, Nymphomaniac is the big one that outrages me. I've said that kind of recently.
I think I get what Lars von Trier was getting at with that ending, but I also think it's unnecessary and stupid.
Well, it
doesn't work.
He wrote this really rather human, sympathetic movie about learning to feel sympathy for humanity again and regaining your hope, and then he does this like adolescent double back, like in the last 90 seconds.
It's just a stupid
ending.
Cut the last minute out of that movie. It's a great movie. That minute, it's bad. It's a genuine betrayal. I hate that. It's annoying when you get through a whole movie and then they just throw it away in the last minute.
One that's really been bugging me actually recently, the more I think about it, is Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is a really interesting treatise on the way superheroes are treated as soldiers in a grand war machine, and it's about this woman who's trying to sort of end all war. And then when they give in to that stupid, just digital big fight scene at the end, it undercuts a lot of its messages.
You know, here's my thing with that ending. I think the ending of Wonder Woman is the worst part of Wonder Woman because I think that's the one time when they just flat out do mainstream, cloying, tropey blockbuster shtick.
Yeah, and after being relatively more interesting up to that point.
Relatively graceful, I think, about its storytelling, and it just becomes throwing CGI at you, and that's frustrating. I think, however, that even though it's really sloppily handled, I do think that the overall message of the film comes across, and I think it functions. I just think it doesn't... It doesn't stick the landing quite right. I still love that movie, and I still think it's one of my favorite. It's going to be on my list of the best movies of the year because the overall impact it had. But that is a legitimate critique, and I think it's a very fair critique. And I would be very surprised to find out that wasn't a studio note. That Patty Jenkins was super gung ho about that ending, and that was exactly the way she wanted. I'd be very surprised. I'm trying to think of movies that were like really had like I was totally with them, and then the ending just blew. And I'm really nothing's quite coming to mind.
While you're thinking, I can at least address your concerns about the Florida Project. I love the Florida Project. That's definitely going on my list of the best films of the year because of that realism that you mentioned. I think the ending made sense. I don't want to give away what happened at the ending. I'll just say that what happens at the end of that film makes sense to the 6-year-old characters that it follows. The 2 characters are they're children. You know, they're very, very young. They've just reached this hugely emotional point in their lives, and they don't know how to deal with that except to do what they did. And it does feel kind of strangely cathartic, even though you know that this is not a happy ending for these kids. It just feels like it in that moment, and I think it's really important to end on this note of very mild fantastical optimism. I think it's a really great ending.
Well, I actually I still need to see that one, so I'm going to refrain from that. I do think there was a topic to be had here about realism, and I had a teacher in college who was very anti-realism as an ideal.
Okay.
You can make a realistic movie, tell a realistic story, and that can be great, but the idea that, it's real, therefore it's good. And his argument was, I can see realism every day by going outside. I don't need to pay money for that. I am going to a movie, I'm reading a book, whatever, in order to see something that is better than that. Now, you can do that through realism, you can do it without realism. There are bad realistic movies. Just as there are bad phony movies. And there are brilliant phony movies, and there are brilliant realistic movies. Don't feel like just because it has the tone of something great, you need to love it. I'll tell you this right now. I think we'll review it in full next week. But I just watched Hostiles.
Okay.
A new film from Scott Cooper, the director of Black Mass and Crazy Heart. And it feels important. It's got the tone of importance, but then you're watching it and you realize this isn't really doing anything for me because it's one thing to have the air of significance and another thing to actually be significant. Yeah. And I think being able to recognize that you're being tricked is a really important step for anyone's evolution as an audience member. To be able to look past this is slick and actually see, is it slick to hide the fact that there's nothing here?
A lot of people are a lot of like... I don't want to sort of like reduce audiences, but I think that's why a lot of like big mainstream movies are really alluring to big audiences because they're slick and they're really easy to consume.
Yeah.
And people aren't really concerned with sort of the deeper messages therein. And if you can see a really slick A production and realize that there are a lot of weaknesses underneath it, then I think you're evolving as an audience member.
I think the movie I think of a lot when I think of this, and it's not realistic, but it's A Beautiful Mind. Won Best Picture. It's very slick production. There's a lot of good work that went into it. But then you're watching it and you realize that everything about this movie that is trying to be emotionally resonant is doing it in a really hacky
really
way.
Manipulative way.
Yeah, you could give everyone like a series of flashcards on how to manipulate the audience, and A Beautiful Mind does it. Now, arguably it does it rather well. Those things, they work, but when you shove them all together like that, the whole movie ends up coming across rather false. But if you're watching it kind of casually, or if you're not like super into the art form, you don't watch a lot of like serious Oscar dramas, you can totally get a lot out of that movie and think it's a great movie, and maybe to you it is, but I think if you watch a lot of films like it, you'll realize that's kind of the superficial version.
I think that example is just fine. You know, I don't mind being manipulated by Ron Howard here and there.
I think Ron Howard I think Ron Howard can do it well, but I think the material in Beautiful Mind is just all surface. But then I think of something like Cinderella Man, which is also rather manipulative, but I think it's a bit more graceful about it. Or you do something like a sports movie like Rush, which hits all the sports movie cliches, but it does it so well.
Rush is underrated, that's for sure.
All right, what do we got? What's the next letter?
All right.
You got time for one or two more.
So I don't know. I really like the Florida Project. I'm sorry I didn't do it for you. This one
I've heard some real hot and cold on it. So
this one comes from Charlotte, and this is about The Shape of Water.
Oh, hi, Charlotte.
Hey, Witney and Bibbs. I was listening to the podcast last week and heard your review for The Shape of Water. I'm happy you guys enjoyed the movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. I live in Toronto, where at least some of the movie was shot. About a year and a half ago, I was riding my bike, and I came across a film set. They were using a local diner and changed some of the exteriors for the movie. As I continued on my bike, I turned and saw about 40 and 50 extras all dressed up in 1960s outfits. It was quite shocking. I felt like I had been transported back in time since everyone looked exactly the same. I later looked up to see what film was being made, and it was The Shape of Water. Ever since then, I've been waiting for this movie to be released so I could see just that scene. I was wondering if either of you have any interesting film set stories, either from your hometowns or from your time living in LA. Thanks for answering my question. Love the podcast, Charlotte. Well, yeah, we live in LA. You go down to any street corner on any given day, and they're filming something.
There's a decent chance. Anyway.
I grew up near Santa Monica Beach, where they filmed Baywatch.
There you go.
I went down to the beach with my family to exercise at around 5 in the morning. It was just sort of a family ritual of ours. And that's when they shot the show, because there weren't people on the beach yet. It's like 5 a.m. and you could see extras being sprayed down with tanner.
Yeah, they've been there all day.
Yeah. And I don't think we never saw any of the stars. But yeah, it was always just like extras in like these really sexy swimsuits being sprayed down with makeup. We always thought that was really entertaining.
My parents were both in education. My dad was an administrator. My mom was a teacher, and they shot a lot of scenes from movies at schools. Like there was a scene at a school in Liar Liar that was shot at my mom's school where she was working, so I got to be around the set. I didn't meet Jim Carrey or anything like that, but I got to see them work, and it was cool. And there was but the one I remember actually was a movie no one cares about. It starred like that one little kid from Jurassic Park called Star Kid. And it was like this family movie,
it's a Trimark
sci-fi,
film.
This low budget kid superhero movie, and they needed a bunch of school scenes, and they shot it at my mom's school, and they shot it. I think they shot it in my mom's classroom because they dressed it up and they added a bunch of stuff. And then when they were leaving and they were taking all of their props with them, they loaded up the class guinea pig.
Oh no!
And my mom had to chase down the truck.
Oh no!
Because you're taking our guinea pig.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, you know what? Here's another fun one. And I have like dozens of these stories, and I'm not going to bore you. But one I am going to bore you with is the movie theater where I worked for many years, the New Art.
Oh, I know. I know what you're going to say,
several films were shot there, mostly low-budget stuff. Mariana Polka's Good Dick was filmed outside and at the video store next door. But Rob Zombie wanted to film a movie scene for The Lords of Salem. And so I got to see Rob Zombie storming around. I was brought in to sort of manage and wrangle, but it was mostly just extras, and we had to make sure, like, real theater employees were giving real popcorn, and you had to turn on all the machines. And he decorated our theater to look like it was an all-night movie marathon. So there were all these, like, weird, spooky, cheapy-looking Halloween decorations.
Yeah.
And when he left those.
Oh, that's cool.
They didn't take the Halloween decorations, so we took them all down and took them home.
Nice.
So one of my Halloween decorations that I hang outside my door every day, or every Halloween.
Every day is Halloween.
It's a plastic skull. They drew stitches on it with a Sharpie.
Yeah.
And they put a pin and a fishing line on it, and now I just hang that outside. That's a prop from The Lords of Salem. The scene never made it into the movie.
Oh, that's too bad.
So it was a prop from a movie, but you won't see it in the movie.
That's too bad. All right, let's do another letter. That's a fun one.
One more letter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you gotta go. You gotta
and then I
yeah.
Sorry, I do have the schedule of a parent.
We record these things when we can. We would go on forever if we could.
Yeah. This comes from Tommy. Hi, Tommy.
Hi, Tommy.
Greetings from the Philippines.
Oh, that's awesome. Hello.
Hello. I'd say greetings in Tagalog, but I don't speak Tagalog. Hello, Whitney and Bibbs. Caught your podcast on the SK Plus channel, and it's been rather enjoyable to listen to while on my daily commute.
Yay.
Commute. Sometimes I pronounce words correctly. I just wanted to ask you about last year's Best Picture winner, Moonlight. Can you explain why this won Best Picture compared to the other nominees? This film bored me to death compared to the other films nominated. Is it a cultural thing? Am I too lowbrow for this kind of film, or is it something else? Please do enlighten me, and thanks for the entertainment.
I wouldn't say you're too lowbrow. I mean, there is just taste, but like it's. Moonlight is an interesting film because when we look at Oscar punditry and we look at like what the Academy tends to gravitate towards, Moonlight doesn't actually fit that a lot. It's a very low budget film. It is a film about minority experiences, which are not commonly rewarded at the Academy. It is a movie about being gay, which isn't necessarily rewarded at the Academy either, unless it's very melodramatic, which Moonlight is not.
When Hollywood tackles like a sensitive racial or minority issue, it tends to be really like they highlight it a little too much in the typical like Oscar bait Academy movie.
Well, one thing they do often in a lot of these movies, and you look at something like Dallas Buyers Club or The Blind Side, is they'll tell a story about white people learning that other people have it bad and becoming the hero.
And they don't tell it from the perspective of the gay people or of the black people. It's always the straight white guy who comes in and rescues them.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey won Best Actor, Jared Leto won Best Supporting Actor. Yeah. There you go. That's how that works.
The prime offender of this, and I think it was supposed to be Oscar bait, but it was just a crap film, was Wind Talkers.
Oh, yeah.
About the Navajo code speakers during World War II. And
fascinating story.
And they cast like actual Indian actors who actually spoke learned to speak the Navajo code, and the main character is Nicolas Cage, the white guy who has to protect the Navajo code talker.
And has to learn a valuable lesson.
How about you just tell a story of the Navajo code talker, idiot?
That's how I felt about the movie Glory, which is a very great production, handsome production, wonderfully acted. Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, they're all amazing. And the protagonist is Matthew Broderick. The least interesting character in a lot of ways. Like, I understand he was a real person, he's in the movie. Why is he the protagonist? And it's a little condescending. Moonlight is told from that intimate perspective. It's also very experimentally told because it's a story about one person's life told through three different actors. One as a little kid, one in high school, one as an adult, as various important events shape who he becomes and make him a very different person in each unit. And I don't think this would have won Best Picture 5 years ago. And the reason why, I think part of it is because they're actively changing the demographic of the Academy, and it's no longer people who like the exact same movies anymore. And so I'm very curious to see how this year's Oscars is going to shape up. Yeah. Because we don't have like that one Forrest Gump frontrunner right now. It really is anyone's game. Again, the Oscars only mean so much, but they're interesting to look at and talk about. I can't say for certain exactly why Moonlight beat out La La Land, for example, which was favored to win and won more Academy Awards overall.
And they announced
I know
as the winner.
It's a hell of a thing. I honestly think that people realize that as entertaining as La La Land is, and I know some people think I'm really anti La La Land. I think it's okay. It doesn't blow me away. I think there are things about it that are really great, and I think there are things about it that are kind of middle of the road if you're a fan of the musical genre.
I think it's a neat idea done badly.
I wouldn't say it's done badly, but if it had been done better, I think I would have been totally on board.
Yeah.
Whatever, I guess that's true for anything. If it was better, I'd like it more. Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But I think there's an understanding. I think you can watch Moonlight and La La Land back and forth, and you can realize that La La Land is sweet and made with a lot of heart, and it's made to appeal to a certain group of people. I think you can also see that Moonlight is trying something much more complex.
And much more,
I think emotionally complex, much more narratively and philosophically complex.
Well, much more human, much more real, much more soulful, much more like relatable on an everyday human level.
And I think La La Land is not as... I think Moonlight is illuminating. I like watching movies because they're not...
And Moonlight is illuminating, isn't it?
I think... Yes, Sergio, thank you very much. Sergio also liked Moonlight. I think La La Land you can appreciate entirely on a surface level. I think Moonlight demands that you look at the film from a different perspective. And I think that's the great value of art, is that you can see the world from other people's perspectives. I don't understand this idea that I don't like this movie because someone I can empathize with, or I don't see me in the movie. I think that's so limiting, and I think the beauty of art is that you can now see the world through different eyes. And how exciting is that? How scary is that sometimes? How exhilarating that can be. And I think Moonlight was so particular about it that I think a lot of people watched it, and whether or not they had as much fun as La La Land or any of the other nominees, I think it's hard not to say that you were transported into someone's life and it felt real.
Yeah.
Again, if you don't like it, that's totally fine. There's a lot of movies that other people love that just don't do it for me, and that's totally fine. Moonlight might also be a movie that you want to revisit like 10 years down the line, and you might see something in it you didn't see before. That's a lot of great movies are like that.
Yeah, like some movies great works of art, great books, only start to make sense like once you're well into adulthood.
Yeah, you have to have certain life experiences in order to appreciate everything that they're laying down. And I'm sure I'm going to keep discovering that, and if hopefully I live to be 100. If when I'm 100, I'll see movies about 100-year-olds, and I'll be like, oh my god, I get it now.
If you read Moby Dick in high school, first of all, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's brutal when you're in high school. You read that when you're 35, that's a brilliant work of art.
Great Gatsby is another one where I don't think a teenager is really going to pick up on everything that it's throwing down.
Even The Catcher in the Rye, which has a teenage protagonist, and they give to teenagers a lot, I think in the hopes that they'll relate to the protagonist. You're not supposed to really relate to the protagonist. You're supposed to have a perspective on the protagonist that only adulthood can provide.
That's true.
And I think that's true of a lot of great works of literature. Same with Romeo and Juliet. It's like, stop giving that to teenagers. It's about how teenagers are dumb.
Yeah, it's probably like, if anything, you should actually show them Hamlet, because that's a teenager being dumb and self-destructive in a less romanticized way.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, I think when you watch a movie that a lot of people say are great, especially if you respect their opinions and you don't get it, I think as a film critic, when the people I respect like a thing I don't like, and they have a different perspective on it. It's not just like, well, I dug it. Well, okay, I can't really... That's not going to change my opinion. But if they say, no, I see all these things in this movie, I do not think it is my responsibility to change my mind. But if I wasn't looking at it from that perspective, I do think it's my responsibility to at least try to look at it from a different angle, and maybe there's something more there. Or there might not be.
At the very least, reconsider it in your mind.
Yeah. And there are movies that have grown in my estimation over the years, partly for that reason, because I see that other people were picking up on things I didn't get at the time, and there are things that I like less than I did for similar reasons. That's fine. You're allowed to change. But again, if you like something better than Moonlight, that's cool. A lot of people did. That's totally fine. The Academy is not the ultimate arbiter of taste. Try to remember that, and just use it as an excuse to seek out movies that you may not otherwise have. And I think there's all this talk about the Academy, they never nominate blockbusters anymore. Yeah, but think about how many movies most people would never have heard of if the Academy had nominated them. More people have seen Moonlight, probably.
Because of that nomination.
Because I'm sure, it did very, very well in theaters, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who would never have sought it out. And now they're like, well, shit, I guess we got to see Moonlight. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. That did some good. You love it.
Now, the real ultimate arbiters of taste are you and me. We're the end of the line. The buck stops here.
Yeah.
We see everything, and we know better than every other critic.
Shut up.
Every single one.
No.
Pauline Kael.
Stop it. Okay, I will have none of your Pauline Kael smack talk. That is bullshit. Okay, I'm going to stop this right here. Podcast is over.
I'm turning this podcast around.
Yeah, everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Critically Acclaimed podcast. Again, you can email us, criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at William Bibbiani.
I'm at Witney Seibold. That's Witney with no H and Seibold with an EI.
You can listen to our other podcast, Cancelled Too Soon, which is not on the Schmoes Know Network. It's a separate entity, but it's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, and we review TV shows that lasted only one season or less. This week we're reviewing David Cassidy, Man Undercover, which was, if you don't know who David Cassidy is, imagine like a TV show in which Justin Bieber was Donnie Brasco, and they kind of invented Point Break and 21 Jump Street like a decade before those things existed. That's David Cassidy, Man Undercover. It's a weirdly fascinating show.
Sounds fascinating.
It's pretty interesting, so we highly recommend you check that out. Next week we will be back with reviews of a whole bunch of movies, including Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Beyond Skyline, Downsizing, Hostiles, The Post, The Greatest Showman, Molly's Game, and Phantom Thread. We will also be reviewing the bad movie of your choosing. Go to the Schmoville Facebook page. The poll is up now, and your nominees are, once again, Body of Evidence, Dreamcatcher, Judge Dredd, Krull, and Spice World.
Hooray!
Vote with your heart. Vote for the one you really, really want. Don't worry about what other people are voting for.
And debate.
Yeah.
Debate.
So
So tell people why you voted for what you voted for, and try to get other people on your wavelength.
So everybody, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to listen to all the other podcasts on the Schmoes Know iTunes feed. You can go to the SK Plus on YouTube. That's your preferred way to get all of these shows. There's a lot of great stuff here. If you love the movie trivia Schmodown, there's shows about that. There's shows about getting to know various people. The podcast network. There's a top 10 show, which is a whole great movie recommendation show. There's a ton of stuff. So if you're relatively new to it, if you came here because you like the B-Movies podcast, be sure to try some of those out too. So I guess, I guess that's it. So never forget, everyone's a critic.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?